So, welcome to episode 5 now of Absolutely Zero Knowledge. And yeah, I've got an awesome guest today who I'm very, very excited to be chatting to, Daniel Shorr from Modulus. So, yeah, thanks for taking the time out, Daniel. Once again, no need to introduce myself, hopefully by now, but it'd be great to just get a very brief intro. I guess, first of all, just a bit about you, and it's always nice to know your route into zero knowledge. And I know from hearing little bits and pieces from you before that you almost dive straight into it, I think, out of college. But yeah, do you want to give us a brief overview of yourself, I guess what you're currently doing, but then yeah, how did you get into the world of zero knowledge, Bruce?
Sure, yeah, and thanks for having me, Ed. I always joke that I look like I'm 12. I'm a little bit older, but it's kind of the stereotypical story. I was an undergrad at Stanford. My roommate, my buddy, and I, Ryan, we were engaged with a lot of AI research, kind of getting ready for grad school when COVID happened, and so we ended up quarantining during that time, and along with the other folks we were living with, super bored, didn't really know what to do, and ended up reading a lot of crypto papers for fun because the math was still very real and kind of appealing in a way that maybe math and AI isn't as much. And a couple months later, it became very clear to us that all this fun stuff happening around zero knowledge cryptography specifically, and obviously we'll dive into that as well, but that this was an arena that was advancing really, really quickly, right? There was this inflection in progress. And at this point, just as a recap, all we knew was the AI we had done at school and the ZK that we were reading in our free time. And so in an effort to escape adulthood, graduate school, all that stuff, we thought, hey, why don't we combine these two almost just as a science experiment and see where that gets us? And in some sense, that became the origin of Modulus and what we do today. So that's a little bit about myself and kind of how I ended up talking to you.
And just to clarify then, so you studied, your course was all centered around AI, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan in particular is kind of the kind of stereotypical AI researcher, and in like the multiverse kind of worldview, in every other universe would have pursued that in graduate
Yeah.
school. I was actually working on circuits, but not the ZK kind, like the hardware
Yeah.
kind,
Okay.
right before, and definitely I think coming across those white papers and those academic studies really changed the course of our lives, anyways, for sure. But hopefully the course of a new domain in cryptography as well.
Yeah, but that's interesting to know in itself that, once again, a lot of the conversations I had, and I've said this numerous times on here, but speaking to candidates as well, I think there's maybe a false perception that you need to be an absolute maths buff who, has got the most algorithmic mathematical mind in the world to possibly get your head around all this complex, circuit design, these folding schemes, this really complex arithmetic. Whereas, obviously, well, I'm sure once again we'll get into more detail, but what you're working on and the understanding that you've got actually of the zero knowledge side of things is all from just immersing yourself into it and doing it in your own time, really.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, I think, very reasonable questions that one could have looking at Modulus, especially when we started, is how is it possible that a group of kids basically are able to, in a very short amount of time, kind of put out work which, by many metrics, is kind of leading the industry, right? And the kind of TLDR spoiler answer is basically specialization, right? We took this like very first principle approach to solving this problem statement. But it is really cool that despite 30 plus years of academic work, actually maybe a little less than that, certainly more than that in AI, but a little less than that in cryptography, that still, if you have, I guess, an interest in math and the capacity to really deeply engage, you can very quickly contribute to the industry. So that's very exciting, and I think a big reason why people come to this space.
Yeah, I mean, and kudos to you. It's just to dive straight in head first and think, you know what, those two things sound quite cool. Let's, rather than, I don't know, find a job where I can utilize them both, I'll just start up my own entity. So awesome. I mean, fair play. And I mean, yeah, I guess I was figuring out what order to ask these in, but I guess we'll get straight into Modulus. We haven't touched upon it at all, but people may have guessed already that there's AI within zero knowledge proof. Do you want to touch upon a little bit about what you're working on and a little bit about Modulus in general then?
Yeah, of course. And let me just add that I think the verdict's still out on if this was the smart or right decision. We're going to find out together as an industry. But the premise of kind of what Modulus is interested in kind of solving is actually relatively simple, right? And that is for folks who have any awareness of kind of how zero knowledge cryptography is used in the context of blockchains today. It is primarily used as kind of a scaling technology, right? So blockchains are great because they have really high security, and the way they do that is through this like constellation of nodes and social consensus. Awesome. The problem is that you pay for that security, right? And so the question is, how can we kind of add more work to the blockchain without paying out the wazoo, right? And of course, wanting to do this without compromising on the reason to do it in the first place, which is for that security, right? Censorship resistance, especially, as well as just making sure there's no middle out or middleman attack. So within that paradigm of using zero knowledge proofs to scale these blockchain networks, a reasonable question could be, hey, if this tool is so good at that job, what are the limits of that tool, right? And just to kind of revisit the fundamentals for just a moment, what we're basically doing is doing compute centrally, right? Like the thing you're not supposed to do. But we run this extra statement of work, basically an auditor on the side, which is keeping track of all the operations, all the math that is being done in that central compute. And then we send a receipt of that process along with the result to the blockchain for verification instead of the original math. And it turns out verifying that receipt is like a lot easier than doing the original math, right? And so the question, for us is, well, what if we just blew up the size of the math that you're doing kind of, or that you're checking off chain, right? What if you do something ridiculous like a massive AI model, God forbid, a large language model, right? Some of the biggest computational workloads that we have ever seen in production, right? Certainly for any kind of like common utility. And so that is kind of the question that Modulus is trying to answer as an organization, which is, can we use ZK to prove AI models and thereby bring that result, bring those features into the blockchain, into dApps, as though they were natively there in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of think of this as like the ultimate superpower, right? Marrying AI with crypto in a way that honors the security of blockchain networks.
Mm-hmm. And has that come from what you feel is a big failing or shortcoming of AI? Because obviously we all know about the power of AI and where the world's going in regards to AI, so we won't have to touch on that in too much detail. But yeah, is that where it came from, that you felt there is obviously a shortcoming of what it's being used for right now?
It's a good question, and I think if a VC was in the room, I would say, of course, obviously. But since it's we're amongst friends, honestly, it just came from an almost a technical curiosity, right?
Okay.
It's in general, people don't talk so much about this, but there is a very substantial cost of proving in zero knowledge these operations, right? So let's say that you have $1 of compute costs, right? So like to run a DEX for, I don't know, a couple minutes, or maybe that's too, let's say to run a DEX for a couple hours, right? The amount of math you need to do on like an AWS server would cost about $1 of electricity. To then perform a ZK proof of all those operations literally costs on the order of thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. Right. And then we bring it to the blockchain. Now, why does this still make sense? Well, because if you were to run that math on the blockchain itself, it would cost like $100,000, right? Or even more, right? And so even though ZK is objectively still very expensive, it's still like 100x cheaper than running things directly on Ethereum mainnet anyways, right?
Yeah.
And so the question for us was, AI models are many, many times larger than like the logical complexity or the operational complexity of like of an exchange, right? And so we just wanted to see if this was even possible. Now that's kind of how we started. Where we are today, though, is a little more nuanced and maybe a little more exciting, which is we're starting to see that actually when you bring AI features into the blockchain ecosystem, right? So you have dApps with AI. you can start to build dApps that, in our opinion anyways, are strictly weirder, more interesting, and maybe better than the existing kind of landscape of dApps, right? So I think literally today we have an integration with a company called Upshot going into beta, so everyone can use it now. And we can unpack exactly what these features are. But it's basically DeFi with AI features, and it's enabling totally new ways of engaging with DeFi as as a service, and the whole time you're not compromising on that security, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the new thesis, I guess, or maybe the emergent thesis, is that dApp with AI is greater than dApp.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not too controversial.
Yeah. Oh, and that's interesting. I mean, it's not something that I've actually massively thought of before, but if we even took a step back from ZKP and AI, actually, I mean, where are we at in terms of AI within blockchain itself? Because thinking back in all the
Great
work I
question.
do, which is obviously I'm not as immersed into it as you, but yeah, just thinking right now, I mean, I don't seem to have come across an awful lot of that already, which seems fairly bizarre. So yeah, I mean, as a broader landscape, a bit of an overview, where are we at in terms of AI being used in blockchain?
Yeah, and Ed, this is such a good question and a really keen observation, because it's kind of befuddling, right? It certainly was to us, right? If you look at the rest of the world, the Web2 landscape, like every single company in the world is saying,
Yeah.
hey, look, we're adding AI features. It's making our products better. It's making our users churn less. It's more attractive. It's it's making it better in all these different ways. But this is not at all happening in Web3, right? And I think and by the way, it's not like this is a technical mystery. Like you can just pull an OpenAI API into your stack of software that supports your smart contracts or your dApps, right? So like, why is it that we're not really seeing this happen? Maybe it's starting to happen now, but it's certainly taken some time. And I think there's two primary reasons. The first one is very boring, very not sexy, and that is that the AI discipline is just relatively new within the world of crypto, right? Like we've barely kind of figured out smart contracts, right? We're still dealing with kind of how to write Solidity in a way that doesn't, expose a ton of vulnerabilities. And now we have this whole new tool set. So we're just like learning about this as an industry or as a community. The second reason, and this is the maybe more nuanced, but certainly more controversial one, is that in my opinion, there actually is no real way to marry these two without like deeply compromising on the promise of crypto right now, right? And that promise is around security, right? So if you imagine the average dApp as a kind of stack of smart contracts, you have to make this very annoying exception wherever it is that you want to add AI to go off of the blockchain, do that AI feature, and then come back to the blockchain with those results, right? And you totally break security right at that step. And so, in our opinion, I guess kind of what Modulus represents is the capacity to add AI without breaking that blockchain security, right? And we think when we get this into really kind of production scale, we're going to see that unlock, and we're going to see a lot more dApps, DeFi, gaming, identity, whatever, NFTs, which are now actually able to take advantage of the expressive power of AI, but while honoring again the reason here in the first place.
Yeah. And touch upon that again then, where do you see it going? You mentioned a few potential mini use cases there, but yeah, once again, broadly in the blockchain and AI topic, where could we go with it within the realms of possibility?
Yeah, it's 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 the million/many million/billion-dollar question, depending on your worldview, right? Well, I certainly think, like I'm a big fan of the crypto community because there's just such an appetite for experimentation, even in the bear market, and I think that will get even more better during hopefully with the coming bull. So that's kind of convenient and really helpful in terms of building a business that's new. The other aspect, of course, is that there is already the language of mathematical kind of integrity within this community, right? So like you go up to the average person, in crypto land, and you mention, hey, we're gonna prove things, we're gonna make sure that it obeys this decentralized security and the social consensus and yada yada. And people go, oh yeah, I respond to that. That is valuable to me. That is not true in the rest of the world. However, I think as AI models, especially advanced ones, get introduced into just parts of our society that are really high stakes, right? So our security apparatus, our financial apparatus, of course, crypto being maybe the first one, our financial, our legal, our medical infrastructure. That same kind of ideas around decentralized security, around verifiability, provenance, whatever that we value in crypto will just get into the kind of groundwater of the rest of the world in the best way, right? Like it will be really important that it's there. And so in so many ways, I think being able to prove that AI models weren't manipulated, which is basically what we do, crypto is an excellent beachhead. And I think if we are really successful here, we have an opportunity to bring that to the rest of the world in a way that actually makes the world better.
Yeah, and I've got some sort of plan of what sort of topics of discussion we want to cover, and we're winding along. But without going too far off piece, then you mentioned there about ultimately proving that we can trust AI. I've heard you speak a little bit about sort of faithful AI and ZKML. Is that sort of what we're touching upon there? And could you share maybe a bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. And Ed, you'll have to stop me because there's a lot that can be said in this space, right?
You go
I
for
mean,
it.
I think the Davos just happened. This was like the biggest thing they spoke about there, and this is all over the AI kind of academic landscape, and I think in general people are kind of concerned and frightened, which is all around the idea of like AI safety, AI trust. How do I know that an AI model is aligned, right? How do I know that it's something as granular as like, is my social media feed politically biased? And then one day it's going to be as advanced or complex as, is the paralegal, the AI paralegal, or the AI judge, God forbid, making a neutral, reasonable decision, right? And so this kind of broad topic of AI alignment is obviously really important. But my kind of hot take, my controversial stance is that I think we've solved it already, right? And the solve is actually like super accessible, and that is, how do we even know that a human being is aligned, right? So Ed, let's say you and I, we commit some, or rather we're accused of some heinous crime. We go to a court of law and a judge is going to sentence us, right, to some punishment, hopefully not too bad. You and I might be very invested in whether this judge is a reasonable judge, right? And the way we do that today is by looking at the track record of that judge. Were they credentialed? What law school did they go to? What are their Twitter posts, right? And that hopefully informs a relatively complete picture of this judge's like future behaviors, including our sentencing. That's awesome. And it's worked pretty well. It's worked so well. It's what we've relied on for human beings for millions of years, right? We just like ask the guy or gal, hey, are you like a reasonable person? Now, the thing that allows us to do this to human beings is this incredible property around like distinctness, right? Like, or like discreteness, maybe that better said. Like you can hold a person and shake them and know that it's that person. Compute suffers no such luxuries, right? Like compute just like floats out in the ether. You change a couple numbers, you flip a couple bits, you jackhammer a weight, and it's like radically different, right? And certainly, if an AI model is ultimately meant to emulate like human decision making, then it's all the powers of human decision making that can scale for free with all the issues of not being discrete. For me, anyways, cryptography, and especially the brand of cryptography that we practice, is the ability to capture that ethereal kind of floating compute into this like very kind of concrete space, right? And so now we can say, actually, that AI judge, which is making that decision, is the same AI judge that we tested for bias, that we credentialed for neutrality, whose track record we can look at, and whose kind of ultimate decision we can know with mathematical certainty wasn't manipulated, right? Came from that same model. So we call this idea internally commitments with qualia, but TLDR, we think that ZKML is a really essential piece to the roadmap to safe AI and robust AI models in production in the future. But again, crypto is like the first and maybe most important step.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I've spoken numerous times, and in terms of zero knowledge, thinking that it is purely a privacy solution when you mentioned itself around the scalability factor of it, but yeah, in the maybe more specifically in the Web 2 space, that I guess the privacy function in this use case in the AI space is what we're prioritizing. And is that within reason of something that we could see fairly soon in Web 2? We all have fears that AI and robots are going to take our jobs or whatever it may be, but is zero knowledge something that's going to play a part in that, or maybe, like you mentioned, play a part in ensuring the fairness of it, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it will play a part. It will take some time for sure, because the technology itself is still kind of in the early innings, let's say, right? So we haven't dived into as much of the nuance there, but the TLDR is our approach represents, even in a conservative estimate, about 100x improvement over the state of the art, and occasionally 1000x. But even 1000x improvement, let's say, over the existing computational overhead of ZK is still way too expensive for most Web 2 use cases, right? And so this is a big part of why we're really excited about Web 3. We're really excited about crypto. There's that cultural alignment, but there's also kind of the unit economic alignment, which is blockchains are expensive, and even a slight reduction on expensive is very helpful, right? But certainly as that stack matures and we kind of continue to push the edge of the envelope on the academic kind of ceilings to ZK overhead, I expect us to be able to approach the Web 2 use cases with a lot more vim, let's say. So that's the kind of truth, the brass tacks, let's say. But I do think that actually we're already kind of starting to see the early innings again of even Web 2 use cases, and especially we work with WorldCoin, which is of course a company that kind of straddles Web 2, Web 3. I can get into kind of what's happening there, but that specific use case actually is like more Web 2 than Web 3. But yeah.
Okay, and then I guess reining myself back in a little bit, back to Modulus. You mentioned a little bit about what you're currently working on. I mean, you might not be able to share an awful lot, but yeah, what other use cases do you see fit for Modulus, or the potential of what you could build out within reason, or have you thought that far ahead? I know, speaking to people in this space, sometimes you don't know what you're doing the next day, let alone the next year, for example. But yeah, where do you see this product or technology going for yourself and Modulus team?
Yeah. I mean, this is certainly the thing that we spend the most amount of time figuring out, which is like, what is our roadmap, right? Like we have this, what we think is a very compelling vision of the future, but it's certainly not a state function. It's very path dependent, right? So I think right now the big kind of focus area for us is very much on showing that dApps with AI have this like clear utility in our space, right? So we're working very closely with a lot of partners. I mentioned Upshot earlier, IAM protocol on like AI risk modeling for DeFi, NFT projects on like authentic AI art, as well as gaming providers to show that AI kind of mechanisms are fair and consistent within the crypto context. So we're really focused on applications, working closely in this very hands-on manner. And then over the next couple of months, we'll also broaden kind of our tool chain. The same tools that lets us build with AI Arena, Upshot, Ion, and so forth, and WorldCoin. We want to make sure that more developers can have access to that, and we get to kind of build out that community together. But again, all focus on applications, right? I think infra is obviously important, but only insofar as we can build dApps with high utility. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, I mean, just thinking about it there in terms of, once again, you mentioned the variety of different potential customers or clients, you may call them, or different use cases. I mean, I guess that's the beauty of maybe I don't know whether that's intentional as well, but the variety of different use cases for AI, mainly even within the blockchain space. And there's almost not, there's not an industry that it can't be used in, and therefore for you and the Modulus team, or for this technology or the convergence of ZK and AI, there's almost endless possibilities, because in theory, anything that's using AI, we'd love to know that it's being used, as you described, faithfully. So within reason, I mean, is there anything it couldn't be used for?
Well, it's AI is certainly very expressive. It's very powerful, but it is also, not always the right tool, right? It's there are things that it's especially good at, and things that are not as much good at, right? So, I think as part of, I mentioned kind of one of the reasons that maybe we haven't seen this explosion in use cases of AI within crypto, coming from the fact that AI is kind of new. A lot of our conversations actually still very much rooted in AI education, right? So I mentioned right at the beginning that actually the background of the founding team is in AI research. It's not in crypto. And so a lot of our time is focused on, and we're thinking about broadening this as well, helping people understand exactly what are, for example, neural networks really good at, or decision forests, or GANs and LLMs, of course, right? There are all these different flavors of AI models, and they're each really good at a specific kind of cluster of problems. And so, some of our earliest use cases are focused on decision forests. Why? Because decision forests are really good at estimating risk. And turns out risk is something that is really relevant in the DeFi conversation, right? While in the kind of art world, it's all about GANs and diffusion models, right? And of course, in the gaming world, there's a real appetite around LLMs and these like high semantic output tools. So early innings again, but I think definitely the AI education piece will be something we start to focus on more and becomes very important in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and I guess probably this case more widely, not just in what you're doing, but as AI continues to boom, I think it would be healthy regardless of the blockchain space or regardless of ZK use cases, for example. But that's another topic of discussions. Is there any final hot take you want to give us? I've touched upon loads there, and we'll delve into maybe some slightly less technical stuff in a moment. But yeah, any final hot take on or anything we should look out for, or anything else you want to share with us? Put you on the spot there.
I think maybe my final hot take, which really I don't think is a very hot one at all, but hopefully a very reasonable one, is I think intellectual honesty is obviously really, really important, but specificity in our intellectual honesty is maybe just as key, right? So we're writing a paper right now, and one of the metrics that we are really focusing on in that paper is absolute overhead, right? So again, I mentioned $1 worth of electricity to do that original compute. How many dollars of electricity does it cost to prove that compute? This is something in the ZK world we try to obfuscate most of the time, but because understandably it's been very bad historically, good by blockchain standards, but bad in the holistic sense. But I think things have improved to a state where it starts to make sense to talk about this, because the ultimate arbiter of our success as an academic industry is how many sips from the wall do you take to prove things, right? And so maybe my advocacy or the cause I want to champion for 2024 is the move into absolute overhead as the metric that we are all beelining and we're all like trying to solve for. Yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, thank you so much for that. And I've learned loads. I think we could probably go on forever, and you could go into far more technical detail than I could ever understand. But as an overarching view of what you're working on, what we could expect, and what we're seeing even right now, it's been incredibly eye-opening, I think, for me. It'll be interesting to know as well. So I'd like to wrap up maybe with a bit of information about. I mean, it'd be great from personal experience because you've done it. But I mean, in terms of entering the space of zero knowledge, were there any, you mentioned before you just chucked yourself into it, you read loads of papers and then suddenly you're an expert, but is there anything else that you could provide? Because once again, I'm speaking to people all the time who are now, they are desperate to suddenly work within this technology and this space. So yeah, any advice, any resources, anything to listen to, anything to check out. The go-to that people say here is just listen to Justin Taylor. So you're not allowed to have that one. But anything else?
Yeah, Justin Taylor is an excellent resource. His book's very good, of course. Actually, we're thinking about putting out a little like a reading list, right? Just because it's like we have an internal list which is like mandatory reading for anybody who kind of joins Modulus. Not that we've used it too much, but it might be helpful, I think, for us to share that to the rest of the community in case they're curious. I think that for like the really high level stuff, but surprisingly not that high level, Vitalik's blogs are great. They're just an awesome place to start if you're starting from zero and you're happy to kind of consider the mathematical abstractions. That's a great place to start. Yeah, Succinct JDT's book is great. I actually think, unfortunately, there's like really high variance in the quality of cryptography papers. Because like usually if you read the stuff that's famous, there's this like really long list of dependencies. But certainly Zach and Ariel and shoot, I don't remember the third author, but the Planck paper is probably the single most important paper of like the modern paradigm of snarks. Snarks being the application of ZK that we are interested in the blockchain context. And then obviously, I'm going to say our papers. Modulus's Cost of Intelligence. This came out last year. I think it's a really great overview of literally all the popular proving systems that are out today and their comparative performance when it comes to AI models. And then our second paper, which is coming out literally within the next month or so, which is kind of the spiritual successor to the first paper, the Cost of Intelligence, which looks at, hey, okay, we now went from just generic AI models to this very specific AI problem. How can we build the most possibly optimized proving system for just this problem? And it has those absolute overheads. It is already in production. It's put out about 3,000 proofs already, and it's proving every single day. So that was kind of a messy constellation of things, but yeah, I think that reading list probably will be helpful.
Awesome. And we'll get that compiled. And I mean, that's something I love about the, zero knowledge is that it's just constantly evolving. And you mentioned you've only just released one paper and there's another one on the way. And the fact that alongside, there's not many other industries, I mean, there might be, but whereby alongside the typical engineering work or your day-to-day work, you're spending, in some cases, the vast majority of your time actually researching, checking out papers, peer reviewing what else is going on in the industry. And obviously it's in its infancy, but I love that part that everyone is in this community and looking to upskill and looking to learn more. And yeah, there can't be many more industries or little nuances of technology where it's so heavily research and sort of academia driven, which is awesome. Well, that I think is everything I wanted to cover. I can share some little bits of resources. Is there anything else you wanted to touch upon desperately before we let you depart?
No, I think I hope folks are excited and ready for, I think, a lot of weirdness in the best way in terms of the on-chain AI ecosystem. And yeah, I think just thank you, Ed, for having me on. I obviously think about this all day. So I'm always like so charmed and surprised when other people are interested. So I appreciate the platform. Thanks for having me.
That's right. I've learned loads and love chatting to you. And yeah, I hope the listeners do too. And yeah, look forward to seeing what else Modulus have in store coming up this year.
Yes, sir. Lots in store.
I look forward to it. Thanks for your time, Daniel. We'll speak soon.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it.
No problem. See you later.